Okay, welcome back everyone for Section 5, Alternatives to Civilizations. Bantu Africa is our focus today as we work on finishing up our commonalities and variations of Africa and the Americas. Okay, so the Bantu Africa began around 3000 BCE from southeastern Nigeria and the Cameroons, and over time, about 400 distinct Bantu languages developed. And by the 1st century CE, the Bantu agriculturalists occupied the forest regions of equatorial Africa, and some had probably reached the East African coast. And these migrations spread a common Bantu culture. And so over many centuries, the slow migration of the Bantu people out of Nigeria and Cameroon spread a common language base, cultural patterns, farming, ironworking technology, and the land was plentiful and population was small, so there was little need for large state systems. So they continued to spread to most of eastern and southern Africa. Now the movement wasn't a conquest or a self-conscious migration. The Bantu-speaking peoples interacted with the established societies that they encountered, but the most significant interaction was the agricultural Bantu and the gathering and hunting peoples. Now the Bantus had advantages or strengths: numbers, disease, and iron. The Bantu overwhelmed the existing hunter-gatherer societies with their demographic superiority thanks to farming, and their introduction of new diseases such as malaria and the use of iron tools and weapons. So these gathering and hunting peoples were largely displaced or absorbed or even eliminated. So there's a survival of a few of the gathering and hunting peoples, but not many. Now the Batwa, or the Pygmy people, became forest specialists, and they interacted with the Bantu. And so the Bantu had a bit of an impact on the Batwa. The Pygmy people are from Central Africa. They adapted to the arrival of the Bantus by becoming these forest specialists, and they traded products from the jungle for the Bantu goods, and they adopted Bantu languages, yet kept a non-cultural way of life. And the impact on the Bantu in East Africa, the Bantu's yams did not grow well, so they began to farm crops introduced from Southeast Asia, such as coconut, sugarcane, and even bananas. So therefore, the Bantu culture changed because of their encounter with different peoples, like I said, as they adopted new crops and animals. And the Bantu people spread their skills and culture throughout other parts of Africa, specifically the eastern and southern parts of Africa. Now, there's a wide variety of Bantu cultures that developed. And so we see many distinct societies between 500 and 1500. As the Bantu migrations covered a large area over many centuries in the millennia before the early modern era, there's a wide variety of cultural traditions, practices, and rituals that developed. For example, in Kenya, decision-making was based off of kinship and age structures as opposed to a central authority. Zimbabwe and around Lake Victoria, larger kingdoms developed. And along the East African coast, after about 1000, developed rival city-states. And so the development of these different groups really depended on a large number of factors. It's safe to generalize that the Bantu gender codes were less patriarchal than in other societies around the world. The gender parallelism, rather than a strict hierarchy, was the main practice. So they had a less patriarchal gender systems, and the ancestor or the nature spirits is what they worshipped rather than a creator god. Various religious traditions did not focus on the role of a creator god, but rather on the impact of the spirits or ancestors or the natural world. And they were more localized as opposed to universal faiths and rituals. The Bantu-speaking peoples did perform sacrifices, specifically cattle, to access power of those dead ancestors. They used the power of charms that they believe were activated by proper rituals. There's a widespread belief in witches, and the diviners could access the world of the supernatural, or clergymen, if you will. And this was based on the notion or the idea of a continuous revelation, as new messages still come from beyond. And there was not really much missionary impulse into these civilizations. So the Bantu didn't develop a universal religious tradition with a single historic revelation, but rather believed in a constant communication with the spirit world. And these faiths were localized to the specific geographical areas and communities. And that concludes Alternatives to Civilization, Bantu Africa. I will see you again for the Alternatives to Civilizations in North America.